What would you do if the very seat you paid for the space you were promised was stripped away with nothing but a cold glance and a dismissive word? What if, in that moment, every scar of past injustice returned, whispering that you did not belong on a quiet evening flight bound for New York? Dr. Selina Carter boarded, wearing a simple blazer, her presence calm, unassuming. To the crew, she looked like just another passenger. But beneath that quiet strength lay the mind, the resolve, and the authority of a woman who owned not just her ticket, but the entire airline itself. This was no ordinary flight. Within minutes, a clash of dignity and prejudice would ignite at the cabin door, spiraling into one of the most shocking confrontations in aviation history. A story where silence was broken, authority was challenged, and justice descended like a storm at 30,000 feet. How did a black woman, dismissed as unworthy, turn an entire company upside down with a single phone call? And what truths were exposed when power itself was forced to bow? Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, because this is only the beginning of a story you will never forget. The first sound was not the call of an announcement or the chatter of travelers. It was the hollow, metallic echo of engines rolling across the runway outside, a bass note that vibrated through the walls of the terminal. For most passengers, it was background noise. For Dr. Selina Carter, it was a reminder of the world she had chosen to shape aviation, the one industry that still believed it owned the skies. She sat alone in a wide leather chair at Gate C-27 of Phoenix International Airport, her posture calm, her hands folded lightly across a worn black leather bag. Around her, people rushed in waves, parents pulling strollers, executives in polished suits pacing with phones pressed to their ears, students clutching backpacks. No one stopped to notice the woman in the simple charcoal gray sweater and tailored trousers. And that was fine. For years, Selina had lived inside that invisibility. But invisibility has a cost. She could feel the familiar sting of being overlooked, the faint shift in people's eyes when they scanned her face, her skin, her choice of clothes, and decided in an instant where she did or did not belong. The older she became, the more that judgment revealed itself not in words but in gestures. A longer pause at a counter, a raised eyebrow, a whisper of doubt. Today, however, was not a day she planned to bend beneath those silent verdicts. Selina had purchased this airline, Aerolux, only 72 hours earlier. The ink on the acquisition papers was still drying in a law firm's office across town. Very few people knew it, yet only her closest staff, the executive board, and the federal regulators who had signed off the deal. But the company was hers now, down to the last gate agent uniform and the last wingtip of a jet waiting outside. And that fact, hidden beneath her modest appearance, gave her a strange calm. Her phone buzzed once, quietly, on the table beside her, a message from Jonathan Pierce, her chief of staff. Final briefing loaded. Call me if needed. She tapped it away. She did not need a briefing. What she needed was a moment of silence before she boarded. Outside the lounge windows, the choreography of an airport unfolded like a restless dance. Fuel trucks slid between aircraft, their lights blinking against the gray morning haze. Ramp agents signaled with glowing wands, guiding luggage carts into narrow slots. The heavy roar of a departing Boeing thundered above everything, its shadow streaking across the glass as it clawed into the sky. Selina's eyes tracked it steadily, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about her father, a mechanic who had worked night shifts in Detroit, covered in oil by sunrise, hands calloused from twisting bolts on engines he would never fly. He had once told her, "The machines aren't the problem, baby girl. It's the people who think they own them." Those words had stayed with her through years of boardrooms and negotiations, reminding her that power was not about the size of a jet or the weight of a contract. Power was about who got to decide who was worthy to sit inside. She breathed slowly, evenly, though her chest carried a quiet storm. Nearby, a couple argued over boarding passes. A teenage boy clicked his gaming console, sound effects chirping in digital bursts. An older woman glanced at Selena briefly, then away, her expression blank but dismissive, as if deciding that this woman in plain shoes could not possibly be someone of importance. Selena felt the sting, small but sharp, the way she had felt it countless times before. Yet she did not flinch. The overhead speaker cracked alive. Aerolux Flight 417 to New York City. First-class passengers may now board. That was her flight. Selena rose, lifting her leather bag. Her stride was steady, unhurried, measured against the impatience of those around her. She had always believed that walking slowly in a world of people rushing was its own kind of quiet rebellion. At the gate stood Michael Reed, a young agent with tired eyes but a kind smile. He scanned her digital boarding pass, the screen flashing green. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Carter, Seat 1A. We hope you enjoy the flight." She returned a faint smile. It was the first and only moment of simple respect she would receive that day. As she stepped through the jet bridge, the cool air shifted, the smell of metal, recycled oxygen, and faint coffee from the galley mixed in the narrow tunnel. Selena's heart tightened slightly, not with fear, but with memory the many times she had been told to move aside, to wait, to prove herself twice over. She reminded herself, today is different. Today, she owns this sky. Still, doubt whispered, would it matter? Would her title, her legal documents, her power change the way people looked at her face, her skin, her quiet presence? Or would they see only what they wanted to see, someone who did not belong? She shook the thought away as she approached the airplane door. The metallic click of the handle unlocking echoed down the jet bridge, a sharp sound that reminded her of a lock turning on fate itself. She breathed once, deeply, and crossed the threshold. The cabin lights glowed soft gold. First-class seats stretched wide in leather comfort. Passengers shuffled bags into overhead bins, some glancing up with practiced indifference. Two flight attendants stood at the doorway. One, young and nervous, her name tag gleaming under the lights, Emily Jensen. The other, older, sharp blonde bob, framing a face set in quiet judgment, Rachel Doyle. Their conversation cut off as Selena stepped inside. Emily's eyes flickered, unease stirring. Rachel's gaze swept Selena head to toe, her lips curving not into welcome but into appraisal. Selena kept her face calm, her stride steady, yet deep within. The storm she had carried all morning shifted. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in the silence between words,
It's
in the
time
weight
to take
of
control
Rachel's
of our
stare,
narrative
in
and
the way
create the
Emily
change
took a
we
tiny
wanna
step
see.
back as though preparing for conflict. She tightened her grip on the leather bag. This was not just another flight to New York. This was a test. One she had not chosen, but one she would not run from. Selena Carter stepped deeper into the cabin, unaware that in minutes, the decisions made here would ripple far beyond this aircraft. They would alter reputations, topple careers, and reshape the very culture of Aerolux Airlines. and though her face revealed only calm composure, her mind whispered one thought, steady as a drumbeat. Respect is not optional. Not anymore. The air inside the jet bridge carried a chill, a faint metallic tang mixed with recycled oxygen. Selina Carter walked with steady steps, her leather bag tucked close to her side. Behind her, a cluster of passengers shuffled forward, impatience hanging in their voices as they whispered about delays and connection times. She tuned them out. Her focus was on the moment she would step into the cabin, a space that always seemed to carry more than just seats and aisles. For her, every airplane was a reflection of the world outside who was welcomed, who was ignored, who was silently judged. Michael Reed, the young gate agent who had scanned her ticket, leaned slightly out of the jet bridge door as if to watch her go. His kind smile lingered in her thoughts, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was rare, in a system where uniformed authority often meant cold indifference. Michael had given her something simple, something human, respect. Her shoes tapped against the narrow carpet of the jet bridge. She remembered her first time boarding an airplane as a child, holding her father's hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. He had whispered, "Don't let anyone tell you where you belong. You walk like you own the ground." She had been only 7 then, but the words had never left her. As Selina reached the cabin door, she straightened her shoulders. The sound of her bag shifting against her hip was the only noise she made. 2 flight attendants stood waiting, Rachel Doyle and Emily Jensen. Their conversation cut short as Selina crossed the threshold. Rachel's gaze was sharp, her blue-gray eyes scanning Selina with the precision of a security checkpoint. There was no warmth there, only silent judgment. Her bob of blonde hair swung slightly as she tilted her head, as if the very act of Selina stepping forward required her permission. Emily, barely in her 20s, shifted awkwardly, her hands clasped in front of her apron. She offered a half-smile that flickered and died the moment Rachel glanced sideways at her. The silence that followed stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Selina spoke first, her voice soft but firm. "Good morning." Rachel did not answer. Instead, she let her eyes drop briefly to Selina's black sweater, her dark gray trousers, her plain leather shoes. It was a scan disguised as indifference, but Selina knew it well. She had lived her whole life beneath that look, the one that decided her worth before a word was spoken. "Seat 1A," Selina said simply, gesturing forward. Rachel's lips curled into a smile that was anything but welcoming. "Your ticket, please." Selina held up her phone. The screen glowed with the boarding pass. "Confirmed. First class. Seat 1A. The gate has already cleared it," she replied evenly. Emily flinched as Rachel took the phone with a quick, almost snatching motion. She scanned the QR code. The device beeped and flashed green. Confirmation was clear, yet Rachel did not soften. Instead, she lifted her chin. "The system makes mistakes all the time. First class is full. You'll find economy down that aisle, to the right." Her words were delivered smoothly, as if she had spoken them countless times before. A dismissal disguised as procedure. Selina felt her heartbeat dip, the familiar sting of exclusion pressing against her ribs. She remembered lecture halls where she had been the only black student, professors doubting her credentials, classmates whispering behind her back. That old scar burned again, reminding her that no matter how far she had risen, the shadow of doubt still followed. But she was no longer powerless. Her eyes softened, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "My ticket says 1A," she said calmly, "and I will sit in the seat I paid for." Rachel's jaw tightened. Behind Selena, a man cleared his throat impatiently. Another passenger sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance. To them, it was nothing more than a delay, an inconvenience on their way to New York. They did not care about the truth, only about moving forward. Emily shifted again, her fingers twitching against the fabric of her apron. Her eyes darted between Selena and Rachel, uncertainty flickering like a candle caught in the wind. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her courage swallowed by fear of losing her job. Selena could see it all in her posture. The young woman wanted to speak, but silence was safer. Rachel handed back the phone with a clipped motion. "Seat 1A is already occupied. Please move to economy." Selena did not move. The aisle behind her grew restless. People shifted, muttered, adjusted their bags. A woman in sunglasses peeked over the rim, lips pursed in irritation. A man in a business suit glanced at his watch dramatically. The murmurs grew louder, a chorus of impatience pressing against Selena's back. She remained still, her eyes locked on Rachel's, calm, steady, unflinching. The silence stretched long enough for the tension to thicken like fog. Emily bit her lip, her eyes watering. She knew what was happening was wrong, but fear anchored her to the spot. Selena tilted her head slightly, her voice low but clear. "If you don't believe me, scan it again." Rachel's hand twitched, irritation flashing across her face. She snatched the phone once more, scanning. The machine beeped again, the green light flashing unmistakable. "Seat 1A, Dr. Selena Carter." For a second, Rachel's face froze, but instead of apology, she dismissed the evidence with a flick of her hand. The system malfunctions all the time. "Seat 1A is reserved for another passenger. You are holding up the line. Move to economy now." Gasps whispered through the cabin. The man in 1B, middle-aged and rumpled in his shirt, looked up from his phone. His lips twitched into a half-smile, the kind people wore when they sensed free entertainment. Selena's fingers tightened around her bag strap. She had been underestimated before. She had been pushed aside before. But the difference now was the weight of the truth she carried in silence. The truth that with a single word, she could upend the careers of everyone standing before her. And yet, she hesitated. Her inner voice whispered, "Do I reveal myself now? Do I let them know who I am? Or do I watch them expose themselves further? Which path teaches the greater lesson?" The question burned in her chest, behind Rachel. Emily shifted closer to the galley wall, her shoulders trembling. She could not bring herself to intervene. The silence stretched unbearably long. Passengers leaned forward, eyes narrowing, phones discreetly lifted. The stage was set. Selena's voice broke the silence. Her tone was calm, even softer than before, but it carried the force of steel. "No, we will resolve this here, right now." The words landed like an earthquake in the narrow cabin. Emily flinched. Rachel stiffened, and the passengers leaned in closer. The murmurs quieted, replaced by a hush of anticipation. The battle lines were drawn, though only one side knew it yet. Selena took a single step forward, past Rachel's frozen stance. Her stride was calm, her shoulders square, her eyes fixed ahead. She walked deeper into the first-class cabin, each footfall a quiet declaration. The floor beneath her might as well have been built for her alone. Rachel's voice rose sharply behind her. "You cannot just walk in here. That seat belongs to a platinum member. You are not allowed to sit there." Selena did not reply. She stopped in front of seat 1A. The leather glistened under the overhead light. The pillow still wrapped in plastic. The blanket untouched. Empty. The truth sat there. Undeniable. The man in 1B chuckled softly. He glanced up at Rachel, his voice amused. "Not me. One seat is plenty." He returned to his phone, leaving Rachel stranded in her own words. A ripple of laughter and murmurs spread through the passengers. A lie exposed in real time. Rachel's face flushed crimson. She scrambled for control, her voice rising, sharp and brittle. "This seat is reserved for a VIP who requires extra space," but the cabin no longer believed her. Selena stood tall, her hand resting gently on the armrest of 1A. She turned back slowly, her eyes meeting Rachel's, then Emily's. Her voice, calm and precise, slipped into the air like a blade. "The truth is already clear, and we will not run from it." The cabin hushed again, the passengers' phones now raised openly. Every second was being captured, every gesture immortalized. Rachel's authority was slipping, and she knew it. Selena lowered herself into seat 1A with a quiet grace. She adjusted her bag by her side, folded her hands, and leaned back. It was not defiance, it was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from knowing you belong. The storm had only begun. The moment Selena Carter lowered herself into seat 1A, the cabin shifted. It was as if invisible lines of authority had been redrawn, and everyone on board felt it without knowing why.
It's time to take control of our narrative
The murmurs
and create
of
the
passengers
change we
behind
want to
her
see.
became a low hum, like bees restless in their hive. Some raised their phones higher, their lenses catching every angle. Others leaned into the aisle, curiosity etched into their faces. Rachel Doyle did not move at first. Her jaw tightened, her cheeks blotched red. For years, she had wielded authority at the cabin door like a gavel, deciding who entered with grace and who was pushed aside. It was routine for her to correct passengers, to bark orders disguised as rules, to treat first class as her private kingdom. But this moment was different. Something in Selena's composure unnerved her, though she could not yet name it. Emily Jensen, pressed against the galley wall, felt her chest tighten. She had seen Rachel confront passengers before, but none had stood so calmly, so quietly, refusing to shrink. Selena's stillness unsettled her. Emily wanted to speak, to say something anything but fear welded her lips shut. Rachel finally moved. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the cabin floor, her voice slicing through the air. "You are not allowed to sit there. That seat belongs to a platinum member." Her tone was sharp, dripping with the confidence of someone certain they would not be questioned. Selena did not answer. She simply folded her hands in her lap and gazed straight ahead. Her silence was louder than any rebuttal, and it unsettled Rachel more than shouting ever could. The man in 1B chuckled again, unable to resist the spectacle. His wrinkled shirt sagged around his middle, his phone glowing in his hands as though the unfolding drama was more entertaining than any news feed. He looked at Rachel with a smirk. "Not me. One seat is plenty." His dismissal landed like a slap. Passengers behind let out faint laughs, quickly stifled by the tension still coiling through the aisle. Rachel's eyes widened for a brief moment before narrowing again, her authority slipping like sand through her fingers. She turned sharply toward Emily, Call the purser. Now. Emily jumped, her fingers fumbling with the interphone before she managed to summon Gregory Shaw. Within seconds, the purser appeared. He was a man in his mid-50s, with graying hair and a weary expression that spoke of decades in the air. His stride was measured, his voice low but authoritative. What seems to be the issue, Rachel gestured toward Selina with a sharp motion of her hand. This passenger is refusing to follow instructions. She is sitting in a seat that does not belong to her. Gregory turned to Selina, but only briefly. He did not ask for her ticket, did not ask for her explanation. His eyes already carried judgment, weighed down by the need to keep the boarding process moving. "Ma'am, please step outside so we can clarify your seating. We cannot delay this flight for one passenger." His tone was polite, but the words were cutting. In his eyes, Selina was not a valued guest but an obstacle. Selina inhaled slowly. She could feel the sting again, the old wound of dismissal reopen. Years ago, she might have risen from her seat, swallowed her dignity, and complied. But not now. Not when she carried the weight of ownership in her silence. Her inner thoughts pressed against her ribs like a drumbeat. Do I reveal myself now? Do I remind them that they are speaking not to a passenger, but to the very person who signs their paychecks? Or do I let them expose themselves fully, strip away every mask of professionalism until their prejudice is naked for all to see? She remained still. Rachel folded her arms, her chin raised high. Gregory shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the growing attention from passengers, many of whom were now openly recording. Emily clutched her apron tighter, her knuckles whitening. Selina's voice emerged at last, quiet but resonant. "No, we will resolve this here." The hush that followed was thick enough to choke on. The passengers leaned in further, phones trembling slightly in their hands. Every word spoken now was evidence, every gesture immortalized. Gregory's brows furrowed. "Ma'am, please, you are causing a disturbance. If you continue, I will have to notify the captain." Rachel's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Yes, call the captain." Emily flinched. She had never seen Rachel push this far, never seen her relish the confrontation so openly. It chilled her. The cockpit door opened with a soft click, and Captain Robert Hale stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair gleamed under the cabin lights. His presence carried weight, the kind that had silenced countless disputes over his long career. Passengers fell quiet instantly, as if a judge had entered the courtroom. What is going on here? His voice was deep, commanding. Rachel moved quickly, her tone dripping with urgency. "Captain, this passenger is refusing to comply. She insists on sitting in a seat that is not hers, despite repeated instructions. She is obstructing the boarding process." Captain Hale turned his gaze toward Selina. It was not the look of someone seeking the truth. It was the cold calculation of a man deciding whether she was a problem worth eliminating. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you have two choices. 1. Accept the seat assigned to you in economy plus. 2. Disembark and wait for another flight. I need your answer now." The words struck the air like a hammer. Accept or disembark. Two choices, both designed to diminish her. Passengers murmured. Some nodded, eager for resolution. Others shook their heads, sensing the injustice. A woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "This feels wrong." Selina remained motionless. Her hand rested lightly on the armrest of 1A. Inside, Her chest burned. She heard echoes of the past, of moments when she had been forced to prove her worth again and again. Professors doubting her, clients underestimating her, colleagues stealing credit for her work. Always the same wound, reopened in new forms. But today was different. She was not a powerless student anymore. She was the owner of this very aircraft, of the airline itself, of the future of every uniform standing before her. Her eyes rose slowly to meet Captain Hale's, calm, steady, unblinking. Her voice was soft, but each word landed with precision. I understand the choices you have given me, and I understand the authority you believe you hold. The captain tilted his head slightly, frowning. Rachel smirked, convinced victory was within reach. Gregory exhaled in relief, as if the matter was about to be resolved in his favor. Selena reached into her bag. Her fingers brushed against the worn leather, then pulled free a device that glinted under the cabin lights. Not a sleek smartphone, a satellite phone. Passengers gasped softly. Emily's eyes widened, confusion flickering across her face. Rachel's smirk faltered for the first time. The captain's brow furrowed in disbelief. Selena pressed a button. A faint static filled the cabin, sharp and cold. "Jonathan," she said, her tone steady. "Activate Code Indigo immediately." The line crackled. Then came the clear, commanding voice of Jonathan Pierce, her chief of staff. "Order received. Activating now. Dr. Carter." Rachel blinked rapidly, her mouth falling open. Gregory's face paled, his authority crumbling. The captain's stern facade faltered, unease flickering behind his eyes. Passengers whispered furiously. Phones captured every second. The air was electric, thick with realization. Something extraordinary was unfolding, and no one yet knew the full extent. Moments later, the intercom blared with the voice of air traffic control. Aerolux Flight 417 confirm. Ground stop in effect. Jet bridge remains locked. Pushback not authorized. Emergency directive from headquarters. The cabin erupted. Gasps, shouts, disbelieving laughter. Every eye turned toward Selena Carter, still seated calmly in 1A, her hand resting lightly on the satellite phone. Her gaze swept the cabin slowly, deliberately, and in that gaze was the quiet certainty of someone who no longer needed to demand respect. She embodied it. Rachel's voice cracked. Who are you?" Selena's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "The truth is already unfolding. You will learn soon enough." And with that, the balance of power shifted forever. The cabin was a crucible now. Every breath carried tension. Every glance carried judgment. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, phones held high, some trembling as they recorded. A chorus of whispers rippled down the aisle, building into an undercurrent too strong to ignore. The air inside the first-class cabin was no longer thick with the scent of polished leather and faint coffee. It was thick with fear. Gregory Shaw stepped closer, his shoulders squared as though bracing against a storm. For decades he had worked the skies, earning his place as a purser through seniority and discipline. But in this moment, his voice betrayed unease. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you are obstructing this flight. Please step outside so we can resolve this without further delay." He didn't ask for her boarding pass. He didn't acknowledge the phone in her hand. He didn't even attempt neutrality. His words placed the blame squarely on Selena Carter, as if she were a disruption rather than a paying passenger with a confirmed seat. Selena's gaze lifted to meet his, calm, unwavering. "You never asked to see my ticket," she said softly. "You never questioned the lie that was told about me. Instead, you chose the path of least resistance." Gregory's lips parted, but no words came. His face flushed, a bead of sweat forming
It's
at his
time to take
temple.
control of our narrative
Rachel
and
stepped in
create the
quickly,
change we want to
eager
see.
to regain control. "Enough of this," she snapped. "You've delayed us long enough. You're not entitled to sit here. Move now, or security will remove you." Her voice was sharp, laced with contempt, the kind that carried years of unchallenged authority. Passengers stirred, some frowning, others whispering in disbelief. The man in 1B lowered his phone slightly, shaking his head with a grin that said he had seen enough hypocrisy for one morning. Emily Jensen stood at the edge of the galley, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Her hands trembled as they clutched the service tray against her body. She wanted to say something, to point out that the system had confirmed Selena's ticket twice, that the seat was visibly empty, that the truth was as plain as the leather beneath her. But fear strangled her, the fear of losing her job, of crossing Rachel, of breaking the chain of command. Selena noticed the tears shimmering in Emily's eyes. Her heart tightened. She remembered herself at that age, silenced by fear in classrooms and conference halls. But she had learned, painfully and slowly, that silence is not neutral. Silence always takes a side. Gregory cleared his throat. "Captain Hale, perhaps." But the captain cut him off. His voice was deep, cold, absolute. "Enough. This flight will not be delayed for one passenger." He turned to Selena. "You have two choices. Move to Economy Plus, or disembark this aircraft. Decide now." The weight of his words fell over the cabin like chains. To him, this was the end of the matter, an ultimatum delivered from the highest authority on board. To Selena, it was proof of the cultural illness she had suspected. Her thoughts swirled. Do I reveal my ownership now? Do I end this charade and crush them with the truth? Or do I allow them to step deeper into their own trap, showing the passengers, the world, exactly what this airline had become? She looked at Rachel's smug expression, Gregory's conflicted stance, Emily's trembling silence, and the captain's rigid authority. She made her decision. Her hand rested on the armrest of 1A, claiming it without words. She rose to her feet, not in surrender but in defiance, her posture tall, her eyes steady. "Am I disrupting?" she asked quietly, "or are you trying to cover what is wrong?" The words sliced through the cabin like a blade. Passengers gasped, their phones trembling as they captured the confrontation. The question hung in the air, undeniable, unanswerable. Emily let out a shaky breath, her lips trembling. She knew the answer. She knew the wrongness of what was unfolding, but fear still held her. Rachel stepped forward, her voice rising to a shout. "Enough. You are now a security threat." Gasps rippled through the passengers. A security threat. The label carried weight, danger, finality. It was the kind of accusation that could justify anything: removal, restraint, even arrest. Selena did not flinch. She placed her hand calmly on the back of the empty seat, her voice soft but resonant. "This seat is mine. The system confirmed it. Twice. Yet you invent lies, fabricate passengers, and threaten me for claiming what is rightfully mine." Her eyes moved slowly across the crew, Rachel's flushed arrogance, Gregory's uneasy avoidance, Emily's silent tears, the captain's rigid authority. Then she turned her gaze to the passengers, her voice rising enough for all to hear. This is not about a seat. This is about respect. The words vibrated through the cabin, echoing into every corner. Passengers shifted, some nodding, others recording more intently. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, "She's right. You can see it." Gregory's chest heaved, his authority slipping further with each moment. Rachel's face twisted with fury. The captain clenched his jaw, unwilling to yield control. Emily's tears finally broke free, streaking silently down her cheeks. Selina turned back to Rachel. "You told me the seat was taken, but it was empty. You invented a VIP. When confronted, you lied again. That is not professionalism. That is prejudice." Rachel's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Selina's gaze shifted to Gregory. "And you, Mr. Shaw, you were supposed to be neutral, to verify claims, to protect fairness. But you never even asked to see my ticket. You chose the easier path, the quicker path. You chose complicity." Gregory winced as if the words themselves carried weight, pressing down on his chest. He had no defense, and he knew it. Finally, Selina turned to the captain. "And you, Captain Hale, authority is not a privilege. It is a burden of responsibility. Instead of investigating, you issued an ultimatum. You chose convenience over justice. You turned a valid passenger into a threat because it was easier than facing the truth." The captain's face flushed red. He gripped his pilot's cap in one hand, his knuckles white. His authority, long unquestioned, now crumbled under the weight of truth. The cabin fell silent. Every eye was fixed on Selina. Every phone recorded. The truth was undeniable now. Emily sobbed quietly, whispering, "I'm sorry," though her voice was barely audible. Selina's voice softened, no longer sharp but steady. "And you, Ms. Jensen, I saw the fear in your eyes from the beginning. You knew what was happening was wrong, but you stayed silent. Silence is also a choice." Emily shook her head, tears falling freely now. "I was afraid," she whispered. Selina nodded once, her expression soft but resolute. "Fear is real, but so is responsibility." The cabin held its breath. Passengers glanced at one another, some nodding in agreement, others wiping their eyes. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. Selina straightened her posture, her voice rising, clear and decisive. "This is no longer about individuals. This is about a diseased culture, and it will not survive another day." Her words landed like a gavel striking wood. The first-class cabin was no longer a sanctuary of privilege. It had become a courtroom, and every crew member stood as defendant. Rachel trembled, her arrogance shattered. Gregory sagged, his shoulders slumped. The captain's eyes blazed with fury, but even he knew the tide had shifted. Emily sobbed quietly, torn between relief and shame, and Selina Carter, calm and steady, stood as judge and witness. The storm had reached its crescendo, but the reckoning had only begun. The silence inside the cabin was absolute, as though the very air had been drained away. Rachel Doyle stood rigid, her face pale, her lips trembling as she tried to reclaim her authority. Gregory Shaw shifted uneasily, his shoulders slumping under the weight of words that stripped him bare. Captain Robert Hale's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. Emily Jensen, young and trembling, pressed against the galley wall with tears streaking down her face. Selina Carter remained in front of seat 1A, her presence radiating calm strength. She placed her hand gently on the armrest again, claiming the space not just as a passenger, but as someone who belonged without question. The passengers held their breath. Phones hovered in the air, lenses fixed on the standoff. Every moment was being recorded, broadcast in real time to feeds that would soon ripple across the globe. Selena let the silence linger, allowing the weight of truth to settle on every shoulder. Then she spoke, her voice steady and deliberate. Rachel Doyle, Gregory Shaw, Captain Hale, Emily Jensen, effective immediately. Your contracts with Aerolux Airlines are terminated. The words struck like thunder. Gasps erupted across the cabin. A woman in row 3 covered her mouth with both hands. A man in the aisle seat muttered. What did she just say? Rachel staggered back, her face drained of color. Terminated, you can't. You don't have that authority. Selena's eyes locked on her, calm but unyielding. Authority is not given. Authority is carried. And today, you will learn exactly where it rests. Rachel's lips trembled. 15 years, she stammered. I've worked here 15 years. You can't just Selena cut her off with a raised hand, her voice sharp as ice. 15 years of service does not excuse prejudice. Longevity is not loyalty when it betrays the values of respect. Gregory let out a groan, sinking slightly into the nearest seat, his head bowed, his hands gripping the edge of his jacket. I didn't know, he whispered. Not knowing is not a defense. Selena replied, You had the responsibility to verify. Instead, you chose convenience, and in doing so, you chose complicity. The captain stepped forward, his voice rough, his pride wounded. This is outrageous. You are a passenger. You cannot fire my crew. Selena turned to him, her gaze unwavering. I am not merely a passenger. She reached into her bag once more and withdrew a leather folder, the gold lettering on its cover glinting beneath the cabin lights. She opened it with precision, revealing an official document stamped with the Aerolux Holden seal. Her voice carried like a verdict. I am Dr. Selena Carter, CEO of Aerolux Holdings. 3 days ago, I acquired this airline. This aircraft is mine. This crew is mine. This future is mine. The revelation detonated in the cabin like an explosion. Gasps erupted louder than before. Phones shook in passengers' hands. Someone whispered, Oh my God, she owns the airline. Rachel staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. Gregory's lips moved silently.
It's time to take control of our narrative
his face
and create
frozen
the
in
change
disbelief.
we want to see.
The captain's eyes widened, his authority crumbling in an instant. Emily sobbed openly, covering her face with trembling hands. Selena let the silence return once more. Heavier now, filled with the enormity of what had just been revealed. Rachel whispered, I didn't know. Selena's reply was swift, her voice cutting. Not knowing has never been an excuse. You treated me as less because of what you assumed. And now, the mask of assumption has torn away. She turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, to the passengers. Her voice rose, each word distinct, each syllable carrying weight. You have all witnessed what happens when prejudice is allowed to live in uniforms meant to serve. You have witnessed the cultural disease eaten away at this company, and you have witnessed the moment it ends. The passengers shifted, some nodding, others clapping softly before stopping themselves, unsure if it was appropriate. The man in 1B, who had chuckled earlier, lowered his phone now, his face sober, his eyes wide with respect. Selena turned back to the crew. Rachel Doyle, you replaced professionalism with arrogance, Gregory Shaw, you replaced responsibility with cowardice. Captain Hale, you replaced justice with convenience. Emily Jensen, you replaced truth with silence. Her voice grew sharper. All of you betrayed the trust placed in you, and as of this moment, none of you will ever again wear the Aerolux uniform. Rachel's knees buckled, and she fell into a seat, sobbing. Gregory buried his face in his hands. The captain gripped his cap so tightly it looked as though it might shatter. Emily whispered through tears, "Please, I was scared." Selena's gaze softened slightly as she looked at the young woman. Fear is human, but silence in the face of injustice is betrayal. Learn this lesson well. The passengers erupted in murmurs again, their voices rising like a tide. Some clapped openly now, others nodded with tears in their eyes. A woman in sunglasses, who had earlier rolled her eyes in impatience, now whispered softly, "Bravo." Selena raised her hand, calming the noise. Her voice dropped lower, but carried more power than ever. This cabin is no longer a sanctuary of luxury. It is a courtroom, and justice has just been served. At that moment, the cabin door swung open. Airport security officers stepped inside, their footsteps echoing down the aisle. Their presence was calm but decisive. "Please, come with us," one said firmly. Rachel wailed, clinging to her seat. Gregory rose slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The captain's face flushed red as he handed over his badge with trembling fingers. Emily sobbed quietly, her eyes on the floor as she followed. Passengers shifted to the sides of the aisle, creating a narrow path. Their eyes were cold, curious, some even satisfied. The disgraced crew walked out in silence, their silhouettes vanishing through the jet bridge. Selena did not smile. She did not revel in their humiliation. She stood tall, her eyes steady, bearing witness as a toxic culture was cut out in real time. The door swung shut behind the departing crew. For a moment, the cabin felt hollow, the void of absence like a wound. But into that wound would soon step something new. Selena turned to the passengers once more. Her voice was calm, resonant. "This is not the end. This is the beginning of change. You will not only receive an apology, you will see transformation." The passengers sat in stunned silence, phones still raised, hearts pounding. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a confrontation, but a reckoning. Selena lowered herself back into seat 1A. She closed her eyes briefly, releasing a long breath. There was no triumph in her expression, only calm resolve. This was not victory. This was responsibility. The engines hummed faintly outside, a reminder that the journey had yet to begin. But inside the cabin, the real flight had already taken off, and at its helm was Selena Carter, a woman who had turned humiliation into judgment, prejudice into reform, silence into a roar heard across the skies. For a long moment after the disgraced crew disappeared through the jet bridge, the first-class cabin was still. The silence was heavy, not with comfort, but with awe. Dozens of phones remained raised, their red recording lights blinking like tiny witnesses. The passengers sat stunned, their expressions a mosaic of shock, respect, and disbelief. Selena Carter sat in seat 1A, her posture calm, her face composed. Her hands rested on her lap as though she had simply claimed what was hers. Nothing more. Inside, though, her heart beat steadily, her mind already shifting from confrontation to responsibility. She knew the removal of the crew was only the first cut. The deeper surgery was still to come. The cabin door burst open again, this time not with security, but with urgency. 3 men in rumpled suits scrambled into the aircraft, their faces flushed, their ties skewed. At their head was Daniel Wu, the 54-year-old chief operating officer of Aerolux. His usual calm demeanor was shattered, replaced by the panic of a man who knew he was already too late. He nearly stumbled down the aisle, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with desperation. When he reached Selina, he bent forward as though the weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. "Dr. Carter, my God, I'm so deeply sorry. This incident is unacceptable. I take full responsibility." His voice cracked, trembling as he spoke. Behind him, the other 2 executives stood frozen, clutching tablets, their faces pale, their hands trembling. They looked like men dragged into a courtroom against their will. The passengers leaned in closer, their cameras trained on the scene. The sight of the COO of an airline bowing before a passenger before a black woman they had just watched be humiliated was a moment that no one in the cabin would ever forget. Selina remained seated, her expression unreadable. She let Daniel spill his apologies, let him stumble through words of shame and regret. When his voice faltered into silence, she finally spoke, her tone measured and cold. "An apology cannot erase a disease. Daniel, words will not heal what is rotten inside this company." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. Yes, of course. You are absolutely right. We will begin corrective action immediately." Selina's eyes narrowed. Not tomorrow, not in some polished press release, right now, here, in front of every passenger who witnessed the truth. The cabin erupted in hushed whispers. A woman in row 3 gasped softly. A man muttered, "She's making them do it here, right here." Daniel's face drained of color. He glanced at the passengers, at the raised phones, at the dozens of unblinking eyes. His hand trembled as he wiped sweat from his temple. "Of course. Whatever you say. Dr. Carter." Selina rose from her seat, her presence filling the aisle with authority. She turned slowly to face the passengers, her voice steady and resonant. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed what should never have happened. You saw the mask of respect torn away to reveal arrogance, complicity, silence, and convenience. This is a disease eaten away at Aerolux, and this is where it ends." The passengers leaned forward, hanging on every word. Some lowered their phones, unable to resist the gravity of her presence. Others clutched them tighter, aware that history was unfolding in front of their lenses. Selina turned back to Daniel. "First, I want a full cultural audit. Every complaint of bias, every instance of discrimination logged over the last 24 months. None of it hidden, none of it buried. It will be reviewed, case by case, and it will be disclosed publicly." Daniel's tablet shook in his hands as he scribbled furiously. His voice was hoarse. "Understood." "Second," Selina continued, her voice rising slightly, "every crew member will undergo mandatory training, not in customer service slogans, but in equity, respect, and the dismantling of bias. Anyone who cannot meet that standard will no longer serve in this airline." Murmurs rippled through the passengers. A man whispered, "She's rewriting the rules." A young woman said softly, "This is what leadership looks like." Daniel's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Yes, mandatory. For everyone. Selina's gaze swept the cabin. She locked eyes with the passengers. her voice clear enough for every phone to capture. From this day forward, no uniform will outweigh the rights of a passenger. From this day forward, respect is not optional. It is required. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then swelling as more passengers joined. A woman clapped loudly, tears streaming down her face. A man in the business cabin shouted, "Bravo!" Daniel flinched at the sound, as though each clap hammered his failure deeper into his chest. Selena lifted a hand, calming the noise. Her voice softened, but carried even more weight. And finally, Daniel. Today cannot stay locked inside this cabin. These passengers have become witnesses, and the world must become witness too. You will ensure this story does not end as rumor. It must echo across every office, every station, every corner of this industry. Daniel nodded frantically, his voice almost a whisper. Yes, yes, Dr. Carter, it will be done. Selena's eyes hardened. No, it will not be done because I say it.
It's
It will
time
be
to take
done
control of our
because it is
narrative
right.
and create the change
The cabin
we want to
hushed
see.
again, the applause fading into reverent silence. Daniel lowered his head, his face ashen. The two executives behind him trembled visibly, their pens scratching across their tablets like guilty men recording their sentence. Selena turned once more to the passengers. You deserve more than words. You deserve restitution. Daniel. The COO looked up quickly, eyes wide. Yes, Selena's voice carried like a command. Every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund, regardless of class, and each of them will receive a complimentary round-trip flight in the same class, valid for 12 months, effective immediately. The cabin exploded, gasps, cheers, shouts of disbelief. A silver-bearded man sprang to his feet, clapping with both hands. A young woman in sunglasses laughed through tears. A ripple of applause spread down the aisles, swelling into thunder that filled the aircraft. Daniel nearly collapsed under the weight of the order, but he nodded, his voice trembling. Done. Selena bowed her head slightly, one hand over her heart. Thank you, she said to the passengers. Thank you for bearing witness. Because of you, this truth cannot be hidden anymore. The applause swelled again, rolling like waves. Passengers shouted words of admiration, their eyes alight with respect. Cameras captured every angle, every gesture, every word. Selena stepped back into seat 1A. She sat calmly, her face serene, her shoulders steady. Around her, the storm of reform roared, but within her, there was only resolve. The COO and his trembling executives stood in the aisle like chastised children, their tablets heavy with commands that would rewrite the future of an airline. For the first time that morning, Selena allowed herself a long, slow breath. The crew had been cut away. The disease had been named. The treatment had begun. But in her heart, she knew the work was not finished. This was not victory. This was responsibility. The jet bridge still clung to the aircraft. The engines outside were silent. But inside the cabin, the course of history had already shifted. And the woman in seat 1A, Dr. Selena Carter, had become not just a passenger, not just an owner, but a force no one could ignore. The thunder of applause slowly ebbed into a murmur of reverent silence. Passengers shifted in their seats, some wiping their eyes, others clutching their phones as though holding proof of something extraordinary. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had transformed. Where once there had been whispers of suspicion and irritation, now there was awe. as if every soul present understood they were witnessing not just an incident, but a turning point. "Doctor." Selina Carter remained standing at the front of the cabin, near her reclaimed seat. She did not raise her hands for attention. She didn't need to. Her presence alone commanded the gaze of every person on board. The hush was so complete that the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. Her voice came softly at first, yet carried with clarity to the very last row. "Ladies and gentlemen, you did not purchase a ticket to witness this. You came here to travel, to reach your destinations, to spend time with loved ones or attend to your business. Instead, you were forced into a humiliation that no passenger should ever endure." Several passengers nodded. A young mother in row 5 clutched her toddler tighter, her eyes glistening. An older gentleman adjusted his glasses, leaning forward, intent on catching every word. Selina paused, letting the quiet acknowledgement ripple through the room. She continued, her tone deepening. "What you saw was not about one seat. It was about something far larger, a culture that has been allowed to live too long in the shadows. A culture that sees judgment first and respect last." She scanned the faces before her. Phones hovered high, capturing every syllable. She did not shy away from them. If anything, she leaned into their lenses, ensuring her message would reach far beyond the cabin. "Today, you saw what happens when prejudice is given a uniform. You saw arrogance claim authority where there was none. You saw silence used as a shield for fear, and you saw convenience replace responsibility." Her words fell like hammer blows, deliberate, rhythmic, undeniable. A man in business class whispered to his neighbor, "She's not giving a speech, she's delivering a verdict." Selina's voice softened, her eyes sweeping across the cabin with warmth. "But you also saw something else. You saw courage in the act of witnessing. You raised your phones, you recorded truth, and in doing so, you refused to let this moment be buried. For that, I thank you." Scattered applause broke out again, softer this time, respectful rather than explosive. Selina inclined her head, accepting the gratitude, then continued. "Aerolux will change. Not with hollow slogans, not with hidden press statements. It will change because it must. Because respect is not a luxury. It is the minimum owed to every passenger who steps onto this aircraft." The words resonated deeply. Passengers exchanged glances, some murmuring agreements. One whispered, "That's exactly it. Respect is the minimum." Selina gestured slightly toward Daniel Wu, who stood a few steps behind her, his face pale, his tablet heavy with notes. "You have already heard the restitution promised. Refunds, complimentary flights, that is only the surface. The deeper change begins with accountability." Daniel cleared his throat, his voice cracking as he added, "Every complaint over the past 2 years will be reviewed. No exceptions. Full transparency. Mandatory training for all crew." He glanced nervously at Selina, but she gave only a faint nod, allowing him to continue should he dare. His voice faltered, effective immediately. A ripple of astonishment moved through the passengers. Some gasped softly. Others leaned back, shaking their heads in disbelief that they were hearing this aboard a plane, in real time, rather than through polished corporate channels. Selina turned back to the cabin, her eyes deep, her tone carrying the weight of a promise. "What you have witnessed today is not the end of an incident. It is the beginning of accountability. And accountability will not stay confined to Aerolux. It must spread across this entire industry. Gasps and murmurs rippled again. A young man whispered, "She's not just fixing this flight. She's calling out the whole system." Selina drew a slow breath, allowing herself a brief moment of inward reflection. She remembered every boardroom where she had been underestimated, every lecture hall where her seat had been doubted, every meeting where her authority had been questioned because of the color of her skin. The sting of those moments still lingered, faint scars etched into her soul. And now, here she was standing in front of passengers who had watched her be dismissed, doubted, and threatened, and showing them what it meant to answer prejudice with resolve. Her voice rose slightly, carrying a cadence that felt both intimate and monumental. There is a belief that power is shown through shouting, through force, through the loudest voice in the room. But power is not volume. Power is resolve. Power is standing still when others demand you move. A hush fell again. Some passengers had tears in their eyes. A young woman whispered, "That's the truth." Selina's gaze landed on a passenger who had earlier rolled her eyes at the delay a woman in sunglasses who had sighed impatiently when the conflict first began. Their eyes met now, and Selina's voice softened. "Even you, I owe an apology. You did not ask to become part of this, and yet you sat through it. You bore witness, and now you are part of the change." The woman lowered her sunglasses slowly, her lips pressed tight, her eyes moist. She gave a small, firm nod. Selina let the silence breathe for a moment, then continued, her voice strong again. "I ask you not just to remember this flight as an inconvenience. Remember it as the moment when arrogance collapsed, when silence broke, when truth rose above prejudice. Remember it so that when you walk into your own lives, you carry the same resolve." The applause that followed was thunderous. Passengers rose from their seats, clapping loudly, some shouting words of respect. The energy surged through the cabin like a wave, a unifying current of acknowledgement and solidarity. Selina did not bask in it. She bowed her head slightly, one hand pressed against her chest in gratitude. When the applause faded, she added quietly, "Because change is not born from comfort. It is born from courage. And today, all of you have shown courage." Daniel Wu stepped forward again, his face pale, his voice almost trembling. "Dr. Carter, if I may." He paused, his throat dry on behalf of the executive board. "I accept these directives fully, and I will ensure that not a single one is ignored." Selina looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "See that you do. Daniel, because this is no longer a choice. This is survival." The COO lowered his head, his hands trembling around his tablet. Selina sat down again in 1A, exhaling softly. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to lean back against the leather. The applause still echoed faintly in her ears, but she did not hear triumph. She heard responsibility. She heard the weight of every passenger's expectation, of every employee who would one day wear the uniform differently, of every future passenger who deserved better. Outside, the engines of the aircraft whirred faintly as the ground crew prepared. But inside, the cabin had already taken flight, soaring not into the sky, but into history. Selina Carter closed her eyes for a moment, and in that quiet space she thought, "This is only the beginning. The skies will never be the same again." The cabin door opened once more. For a split second, every passenger stiffened, expecting more chaos, more confrontation, more unraveling, but instead of tension, what entered was composure. A line of new faces stepped onto the aircraft. They were crisp in their uniforms, their postures straight, their movements purposeful without being rushed. The air seemed to shift with them, like a breath of fresh clarity after a storm. At their lead was a woman in her early 40s, her dark hair neatly tied back, her eyes steady and calm. She wore the purser's insignia on her jacket, but more than that, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew both the weight and honor of her role. She stopped at the threshold of the cabin, bowed her head slightly, and spoke with a voice warm yet professional. "Dr. Carter, passengers of Aerolux Flight 227, it is an honor to serve you today. My name is Marisol Vega, and I will be your purser for this journey." The words were simple, but they carried power. They weren't just recited, they were offered, like a promise. Selina Carter lifted her eyes, studying Marisol. In that small gesture of respect, she could already see the difference. This was not arrogance dressed in uniform. This was dignity wearing responsibility. Marisol turned slightly, gesturing for her crew to follow. A young man and two women moved gracefully down the aisle, placing themselves at attention. Each face was composed, each expression open. Not one of them radiated suspicion. Not one carried disdain. Instead, they looked at the passengers as though every individual mattered. The contrast was staggering. Only minutes before, the aisle had been a battlefield of arrogance, fear, and humiliation. Now, it was steady ground, reset by the presence of professionals who seemed to understand what service truly meant. Passengers stirred, murmuring quietly. Some lowered their phones, their expressions softening with relief. Others continued filming, capturing the moment not of scandal, but of transition. Marisol spoke again, her voice steady, pitched perfectly for the cabin. "We apologize deeply for the disruption you have endured. From this moment forward, our focus will be on ensuring your journey is safe, respectful, and comfortable. Please know you are in good hands." Applause broke out, softer at first, then stronger as more passengers joined. A woman near the middle of the cabin exhaled audibly, whispering. Finally, a man in business class nodded approvingly. Selina remained seated in 1A, her eyes fixed on Marisol. She felt no need to intervene, no need to command. In this crew's simple words and posture, she saw a glimpse of what Aerolux could be, a company built not on fear or convenience, but on service anchored in respect. Marisol stepped closer to Selina, lowering her voice so only she could hear. "Dr. Carter, please know that my team and I are committed to representing the best of this airline. We're grateful for the opportunity to show you, and everyone here, what dignity in service looks like." Selina's lips curved into the faintest smile, one of acknowledgement rather than triumph. "Thank you, Marisol. That is all I ask." The purser straightened, turned back to the cabin, and began directing her team with smooth efficiency. One attendant moved to assist passengers with stowing carry-ons that had been left askew in the earlier chaos. Another distributed bottled water to those whose nerves still seemed frayed. The third offered warm reassurances, bending slightly at eye level to speak gently with the young mother clutching her child. The passengers noticed. They leaned back in their seats, their shoulders easing. Some murmured words of gratitude. The atmosphere began to shift, not fully healed, but mending thread by thread, courtesy by courtesy. Selina observed it all, her sharp mind cataloging every detail. She thought about how quickly trust could be broken, how fragile the balance between authority and humility was in the skies. One wrong word, one glance filled with prejudice, and the illusion of luxury disintegrated. But just as quickly, it could be restored not with empty apologies, but with the simple, deliberate act of treating people with humanity. Her chest tightened as she remembered the sting from earlier, the dismissive look in Rachel Doyle's eyes, the weary complicity in Gregory Shaw's silence, the captain's ultimatum delivered like a hammer. The wound was still fresh, and it reminded her of every other room she had entered in her life where people assumed she didn't belong. Yet, as she watched Marisol's crew move gracefully through the cabin, she also felt something else, a cautious hope. Passengers began speaking softly among themselves. A young man leaned across the aisle to his seatmate, whispering, "This is what it should have been all along." An older woman added, "They look like they respect us, really respect us." Selina closed her eyes briefly, listening to the murmurs, to the shift in tone. Relief was blooming slowly, but it was fragile. She knew the work was far from finished. She knew this single flight could not undo years of culture infected by prejudice. But she also knew this: if a disease is to be cured, it must first be named. And today, she had named it. Her thoughts drifted inward for a moment, into that familiar territory of doubt. Was she too harsh? Had she crushed too much in one blow? Firing an entire crew in front of passengers, it was not something executives did lightly. Yet her inner voice, the one honed through years of resilience, answered firmly. Harshness was not cruelty when it was justice, and justice was sometimes the only language a rotting system understood. She opened her eyes again to see Marisol approaching once more. The purser leaned slightly forward, her voice calm. "Dr. Carter, we are ready to close the door and begin preparations for departure, if you approve." Selina nodded. "Proceed." The words were simple, but to the passengers they carried weight. This was no longer an airline drifting on autopilot. It was an airline where leadership was not hidden behind glass offices, but seated among them, speaking truth, demanding accountability. The cabin door closed with a firm click. The jet bridge began to pull away. A murmur of relief spread as passengers realized the journey would finally continue. Marisol gave the safety briefing herself, her voice clear, confident, never rushed. Each instruction felt not like an obligation, but like a care offered. Her team mirrored her professionalism, their gestures precise yet warm, even the smallest motions, the way they made eye contact, the way they offered a drink with a genuine smile, carried weight now. Selina leaned back into her seat, watching. She thought of the irony luxury was never about champagne and crystal glasses or leather seats polished to shine. True luxury was being seen, being respected, being safe. The engines roared to life, vibrating beneath the floor, but this time the sound did not feel oppressive. It felt like affirmation, like the opening note of a symphony that would carry them into the sky. A young woman across the aisle leaned over, her phone still in hand, her voice hushed. "Dr. Carter, thank you, for all of us." Selina met her eyes, her own voice soft but steady. "Thank you for bearing witness." As the plane taxied, she let her head rest lightly against the seat back. Her eyes closed briefly, not from fatigue, but from the need to hold the moment inside her. She had cut away a cancerous root, and in its place, a seed of change had been planted. Whether it grew or withered would depend on what came next. But for now, for this moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The aircraft turned onto the runway, the engines roaring louder. Passengers pressed back into their seats. Selena opened her eyes as the plane surged forward. When the wheels left the ground and the cabin tilted skyward, she exhaled slowly. The sky stretched before them, vast and unbroken, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Selena Carter felt not the sting of exclusion, but the steady calm of belonging, not just for herself, but for every soul seated in that aircraft, carried upward by the promise of respect. The seatbelt sign dimmed as the aircraft leveled off above the clouds. A hush fell over the cabin, a quiet different from the tense silence earlier. This hush was lighter, the kind born of relief and tentative peace. Passengers shifted, exhaled, let themselves relax into their leather seats. The storm was behind them, though its echoes lingered. Selena Carter sat motionless in 1A, her gaze fixed on the endless white outside the window. The sunlight glinted off the clouds, painting them gold, but her mind drifted inward. For the first time since stepping onto the plane, she allowed the silence to penetrate her own thoughts. She replayed the confrontation like a film. Rachel Doyle's cold eyes, Gregory Shaw's weary complicity, Captain Hale's ultimatum, thrown like a gauntlet, and the way Emily Jensen's lips trembled, the fear in her young eyes as she stayed silent. Selena had cut them all loose, decisively, publicly. Her chest tightened. Justice had demanded it, but beneath the steel of her decision, a softer question whispered. Had she left room for redemption, she thought of Emily again, the youngest, the one who had flinched at every wrong turn, yet spoken no word. Selena could still hear her apology, broken through tears. I was afraid. Was it enough? Could fear excuse silence? Her fingers
It's time to
curled
take
against the
control of our
armrest.
narrative and create
No,
the change
she
we
told
want to see.
herself firmly, silence is betrayal. If she excused it, she would excuse every bystander, every witness who looked away when injustice stood in front of them. And yet, in her heart, she knew it wasn't so simple. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "Excuse me, Dr. Carter." She turned to see the man in seat 1B leaning slightly toward her. He was middle-aged, his shirt wrinkled from hours of wear, his eyes sharp but softened now by respect. Earlier, he had smirked at the unfolding drama, treating it as entertainment, but his expression now was different, serious, almost contrite. "Yes," Selena replied, her voice calm. The man cleared his throat. I wanted to say thank you. When it all started, I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was just another delay, just another passenger arguing with crew. I was wrong. What you did, standing firm, exposing the truth, had opened my eyes." Selena studied him, weighing his words. "Do you know why it opened your eyes?" He hesitated, then admitted quietly, "Because I realized I've looked away before, at work, in public, even in my own family sometimes. When something wrong happened, I stayed silent because it wasn't my problem." Selena's voice softened. "Silence feels safe, but it isn't. Silence feeds the disease." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping. "You're right." For a moment, they sat in quiet understanding. Then Selena turned back to her window, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. Her mind circled the man's confession. It was a reminder, even those who watched with folded arms could be changed by truth if it was revealed clearly enough. Across the aisle, a young woman leaned forward hesitantly. Dr. Carter Selena met her eyes. The woman's phone was still in her lap, the red recording light off now. She looked no older than her 20s, her voice timid but sincere. "I live-streamed earlier. A lot of people are watching, thousands already." Selena gave a small nod, then let them watch. The young woman's brow furrowed. "Aren't you worried about how people will spin it? About critics saying you humiliated the crew, or that you used power to crush them?" Selena's lips pressed together. Critics will always speak. Some will see justice, others will see vengeance. But my responsibility is not to silence critics. It is to stand firm in truth. The young woman's eyes glistened. "I want to be like that, strong, unshaken." Selena's voice softened again. "Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to bow to it." The young woman smiled faintly, nodding as though those words had etched themselves into her heart. The purser, Marisol Vega, approached quietly, her steps light on the carpet. She leaned slightly toward Selena. "Doctor, Carter, may I get you anything water, tea? Perhaps something to eat?" Selena shook her head gently. "Thank you, Marisol. I'm fine." But when Marisol stepped away, Selena's thoughts returned to the ache inside her chest. Was she truly fine? She had wielded her authority like a blade, swift and decisive. But now, in the quiet, she felt the weight of the blade in her hand. She thought of Rachel Doyle, sobbing into her hands, Gregory Shaw, slumped like a man who had lost his soul, Captain Hale, his eyes blazing with a fury he could not act upon, and young Emily, pleading for another chance. A part of Selena's heart whispered that redemption mattered. Another part answered sharply, redemption cannot come without accountability. She closed her eyes, hearing echoes of her own past. The lecture halls where she was told she didn't belong, the boardrooms where her decisions were second-guessed before they were spoken. The investors who had once smiled politely but doubted her worth. No one had given her a pass because she was young, or afraid, or learning. She had been forced to prove herself again and again. Why should she now extend to others what had never been extended to her? Her conscience wrestled in silence. Was justice without mercy too cold? Was mercy without justice too weak? A hand touched her shoulder gently. She opened her eyes to see the young mother from row 5. Her toddler, now asleep in her arms, breathed softly against her chest. "I just wanted to say," the woman whispered, "you gave me hope for my daughter, that one day she'll fly in a world where people like you are seen, not dismissed." Selena's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, words caught behind the swell of emotion. "Thank you," she managed softly. The mother smiled faintly and returned to her seat. Her presence leaving behind a warmth Selena hadn't expected. For a while, Selena sat still, the clouds drifting endlessly outside. Passengers resumed quiet conversations, some sipping drinks, others typing furiously on phones as the story of Flight 227 spread across the digital world. But for Selena, the cabin had become less about publicity and more about reckoning. She whispered inwardly, almost like a prayer justice must stand. But may it never harden my heart. Marisol returned with a blanket, draping it gently over Selena's shoulders without a word. Selena accepted the gesture, her lips curving into a small smile. She closed her eyes again, letting the rhythm of the engine soothe her. But even in that fragile peace, her mind kept turning. She thought of what awaited when the plane landed. Cameras, press, executives scrambling, policy meetings, resistance from those who resented change. And beneath it all, she felt the steady burn of resolve. This wasn't about punishing 4 crew members. This was about reshaping an entire system. And if the cost of that was being called harsh, so be it, she whispered to herself, barely audible over the hum of the engines. Justice first, compassion will follow. The clouds parted, revealing the vast stretch of sky ahead. The aircraft soared forward, carrying not just passengers, but the weight of transformation. And in seat 1A, Selena Carter sat in silence, her mind a battlefield of steel and tenderness, her heart steady in the knowledge that she was not just flying through the sky, she was flying into history. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began its slow descent. A gentle chime sounded overhead, and the seatbelt sign flickered back on. Passengers stirred, shifting in their seats, collecting belongings scattered during the earlier storm. But this descent was unlike any other. It was not simply toward a runway of asphalt and lights. For everyone on board, it felt like they were descending toward a moment of judgment, a reckoning waiting just beyond the cabin walls. Dr. Selena Carter sat upright in 1A, her blanket folded neatly at her side. Her gaze remained fixed on the window where the horizon stretched wide and glowing. Below, the sprawl of city lights twinkled like constellations scattered across the earth. The sight should have been calming, a reminder of countless flights before. Yet, tonight, it felt like a stage lit for the next act. Her mind turned inward. She knew the media was waiting. The COO, Daniel Wu, had already sent frantic messages. Her chief of staff, Jonathan Pierce, had confirmed it. Journalists swarmed the arrival gate, cameras ready, stories already writing themselves. Her heartbeat was steady, yet she felt the heaviness of what was to come. On the plane, she had spoken with authority, her words sharp as a verdict. But now, beyond the glass, she would step into a theater far larger. Her decisions, her actions, would not be contained to 200 witnesses. They would be dissected across news cycles, social platforms, boardrooms, and government halls. She breathed deeply, steadying herself. She had not chosen this stage, but it was hers nonetheless, and she would not shrink from it. Beside her, the man in 1B cleared his throat nervously. "You ready for what's waiting out there?" Selena turned to him. Her expression softened slightly. "What makes you think I wouldn't be?" He gave a sheepish smile. "Because the crowd out there, it won't be kind. Cameras never are." Selena tilted her head, her voice calm. "Then let them be unkind. The truth does not fear scrutiny." The man nodded slowly, almost in awe. Across the aisle, the young woman who had live-streamed earlier kept glancing between her phone and Selena, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed up dates. Her live audience had multiplied into the tens of thousands. She whispered under her breath, "They're all waiting for you." Selena heard it, though the words weren't meant for her. She let her eyes drift back to the city lights below. The purser, Marisol Vega, walked quietly down the aisle, her eyes scanning the passengers, her tone warm but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Please ensure your seat backs are upright, tray tables stowed, and seat belts securely fastened." Her crew mirrored her poise, moving gracefully as though they were not just performing safety checks, but restoring a fragile trust that had been broken hours earlier. Passengers complied with little resistance, their faces calm, their eyes still occasionally flicking toward Selena in 1A. Selena folded her hands in her lap. Her mind whispered doubts in quiet tones, Had she acted too decisively? Would critics say she abused her power? Would her choice to fire an entire crew in front of witnesses be called theater rather than justice? Her jaw tightened. No, she had not acted for theater. She had acted because prejudice had been exposed in its rawest form, and when rot is uncovered, it must be cut out immediately. Delay only allows it to spread. Still, another part of her stirred the part that
It's time
remembered
to take
Emily
control of our
Jensen's
narrative
trembling lips,
and create the
her
change we
whispered
want to see.
plea for another chance. That memory gnawed at her heart. Was it justice to demand accountability? Yes. But was it mercy to extinguish possibility that answer was less clear? Her reflection stared back at her from the window, strong, composed, yet shadowed by quiet uncertainty. The plane jolted softly as the landing gear deployed. Gasps rippled faintly through the cabin, passengers gripping armrests as the descent grew steeper. The engines roared, then steadied. Selena's thought sharpened. She pictured the moment the door would open. Cameras flashing, journalists shouting questions, executives scrambling to appear in control, the public watching every blink, every pause, ready to twist truth into narrative. Her strategy was clear in her mind. She would not shout. She would not defend. She would not beg for understanding. She would do exactly what she had done in the cabin stand. Speak truth, and let the world see who had failed and who had risen. The wheels struck the runway with a heavy thud. The cabin shook, seat belts tightening across torsos. A moment later, the brakes hissed and the engines reversed, pulling the aircraft to a steady roll. Passengers exhaled collectively. A release of tension held too long. As the plane taxied, murmurs spread again. A woman whispered to her husband. "I'll never forget this flight," a man muttered. "She's going to change everything." Phones lit up like fireflies, screens glowing as passengers prepared to capture the final moments of their journey. The intercom clicked. "This is your captain speaking. We have landed safely. On behalf of Aerolux and under the direction of Dr. Carter, we thank you for your patience. Please remain seated until we reach the gate." The captain's voice was different, now measured, deferential, stripped of the authority he once wielded with arrogance. Selena's chest tightened slightly. Even stripped of his uniform, he still haunted her thoughts. His ultimatum still rang in her ears: economy or disembark. She had turned that blade aside, but the scar of it remained. The plane slowed, turning gently, rolling toward the gate. Through the window, Selena could see flashing lights, the silhouettes of waiting cameras. A crowd gathered, pressed against the glass walls of the terminal. She felt the anticipation ripple through the cabin. Passengers shifted, craning necks, whispering about the scene awaiting them. Some smiled with excitement, eager to be part of history. Others looked uneasy, aware that stepping off this plane meant stepping into a story larger than themselves. Selena sat still, her hands folded, her gaze unwavering. Inside her, the battle of steel and mercy raged quietly, but above it all, one thought rose clear and unshakable. This is not about me. This is about the disease that tried to bury me at the cabin door, and tonight it will face the light. The engines hummed lower as the aircraft pulled into its final stop. The seatbelt sign remained lit, but passengers leaned forward, restless, their eyes fixed on the front of the cabin. Selena exhaled slowly. The descent was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The plane eased to a stop at the gate. The chime sounded overhead, and the seatbelt sign clicked off. Passengers stirred, reaching for bags, adjusting jackets, whispering nervously, but none of them moved toward the aisle. All eyes turned forward. Everyone knew the moment belonged to one person. Dr. Selina Carter remained seated in 1A, her hands folded lightly in her lap. The cabin felt heavy, as if the air itself weighted with them. Beyond the window, flashing lights painted the glass camera flashes, airport security strobes, the restless dance of a crowd pressing close to the gate. A hiss sounded as the jet bridge locked against the aircraft. The metallic click of the door unlocking echoed through the cabin, sharp and deliberate. Selina closed her eyes briefly. That sound carried weight. Earlier, it had been the sound of a storm beginning. Now it was the sound of a verdict waiting to be delivered. The door swung open. The first to appear was Daniel Wu, the COO, flanked by two executives Selina recognized only vaguely. Their ties were crooked, their faces pale with strain, their eyes darting nervously as they stepped into the cabin. Behind them, airport security officers stood at stiff attention, ensuring the crowd outside didn't pour inside unrestrained. Daniel bowed his head immediately, his voice breaking slightly. "Dr. Carter, we are prepared to escort you safely through the terminal. Media is present in overwhelming numbers." Selina raised her hand gently, cutting him off. "Escort me if you must, but I will not hide." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding, his eyes glancing briefly at the sea of passengers who still held their phones aloft, recording every breath, every syllable. Selina rose slowly from her seat. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed the sleeve, and took a single breath. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, as though she had all the time in the world. The passengers leaned forward instinctively, their cameras trembling slightly in eager hands. As she stepped into the aisle, the cabin erupted in murmurs. Some whispered her name, others simply stared, wide-eyed, recognizing the gravity of the moment. A young man in row 4 whispered, "This is history." Selina turned to face the cabin fully. Her eyes swept across the passengers, row by row, meeting gaze after gaze. When she spoke, her voice was steady, warm, and strong enough to still the restless murmurs. "Thank you, each of you. You have borne witness today to something no one should have had to endure. And because of you, the truth could not be hidden." The passengers shifted, some nodding, some pressing their lips tight as emotion swelled in their throats. Selina continued, her tone lowering slightly, intimate yet firm. What happened in this cabin was not about a seat. It was about a culture that believed a uniform gave permission to strip others of dignity, a culture that excused prejudice with convenience. That culture ends today. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling. A few passengers rose to their feet, clapping firmly. Phones shook as they captured the eruption of support. Selina raised her hand again, quieting them. Change does not come with applause. Change comes with accountability. You will see it. You will see this airline rebuilt not with polished slogans, but with respect woven into every action, every flight, every seat. She turned then toward the door. The noise beyond had grown louder, reporters shouting questions, flashes bursting against the glass. Security officers shifted uneasily, bracing for the storm. Daniel Wu leaned toward her, whispering urgently, "Dr. Carter, we've arranged for a private exit through the service corridor. It will avoid the media entirely." Selina's eyes narrowed slightly. Avoid them? Why would I avoid them? Daniel hesitated. Because the narrative isn't under control yet. The board hasn't Selina cut him off, her tone sharp as glass. Control. The narrative was never yours to control. It belongs to the truth, and the truth will not be hidden in a service corridor. Daniel wilted, his lips pressing together as he nodded in defeat. Selina stepped forward. The security officers stiffened, ready to move with her. She gave them a small nod, but her stride was her own, steady and unbroken. As she reached the door, the shouts outside grew deafening, questions fired like bullets. "Dr. Carter, is it true you fired the crew on the spot, Dr. Carter? Are passengers safe, Dr. Carter? Will Aerolux survive this scandal?" The flashes were blinding as she stepped into the jet bridge. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out, cameras trembling with the weight of the moment. Selina raised her hand slightly, and the noise began to fade, not by force, but by the undeniable gravity of her presence. Her voice carried, calm yet commanding, slicing cleanly through the chaos. "Yes, I dismissed the crew. Yes, it was on the spot. And yes, it was public. Because when prejudice is exposed in public, it must be answered in public." The crowd rippled, gasps and murmurs mixing with frantic scribbles of pens and clattering keyboards. She continued, her tone unwavering. "Aerolux will not survive by hiding behind apologies. It will survive by transformation. Effective immediately. This airline will conduct a full cultural audit of every complaint, every incident, every grievance silenced in the past. Effective immediately. Mandatory training will be implemented across every level of staff, and effective immediately. Aerolux will place dignity above convenience, no matter the cost." The reporters shouted more questions, their words tumbling over one another. "Dr. Carter, will there be compensation for passengers? Dr. Carter, will heads roll in the executive suite?" Selina's lips curved faintly, not in humor, but in resolve. "Every passenger on Flight 227 has already received full reimbursement and a complimentary round-trip ticket. As for executives, if they cannot uphold these new standards, they will not keep their seats. Authority is not a shield. Authority is a responsibility." The crowd roared with renewed questions, but Selina pressed forward, her steps firm. The cameras followed, capturing every motion. Behind her, passengers began to disembark, their phones still recording, their voices rising with applause and chants. "Respect first, respect first." The words spread like a current, passengers chanting softly at first, then louder, until the entire jet bridge echoed with it.
It's time to take control of our narrative and create the change we
Selina
want to see.
paused only once, turning back to the passengers. Her eyes glistened faintly, but her voice was steady. "Never forget, change does not come from power alone. It comes when witnesses refuse to stay silent. Today, you refused. For that, I thank you." The chant rose again, louder, until it seemed to shake the glass of the terminal. Respect first, respect first. Selina turned once more, stepping forward into the blinding wall of cameras, into the chaos of microphones, into the roar of questions. Her face was calm, her stride unbroken. She had walked through fire at 30,000 feet. The ground could not burn her now. The terminal was chaos. Reporters pressed forward in waves, cameras flashing relentlessly. Selina Carter stood at the center, calm against the storm, her dark blazer uncreased, her voice, even as she repeated the words that had become a mantra, dignity above convenience, respect before profit. The chant from passengers still echoed faintly in the distance. Respect first. Respect first. It bled through the walls of the terminal, a rhythm that reporters couldn't mute with their questions. Daniel Wu and the other executives hovered nervously behind her, their faces pale, sweat shining at their temples. They whispered to each other, trying to strategize damage control. Selena didn't need to overhear them to know their panic. Stock prices would tremble. Shareholders would rage. Regulators would circle. But none of it weighed heavier than what she had already endured at the cabin door. She turned from the reporters at last, walking steadily through the terminal as security created a path. Passengers followed behind, phones still recording, eyes shining with awe. Some reached out to touch her shoulder as if drawing strength. Others simply whispered, "Thank you." Outside, a sleek black sedan waited. Jonathan Pierce, her chief of staff, opened the door with his usual efficiency, though even his hands trembled slightly. "Dr. Carter," he said softly, "the board has called an emergency session. They want to speak with you immediately." Selena gave a single nod and slid into the back seat. The car pulled away, the flashing lights of the terminal shrinking behind her. Inside, silence filled the cabin. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to lean back against the leather seat, her breath steady but heavy. Jonathan sat across from her, his eyes studying her carefully. "You've set fire to the old order," he said quietly. Selena's lips curved faintly, though not in triumph. "Then let it burn. If the foundation was rot, only ashes can make room for something new." Jonathan hesitated, but the crew, all four dismissed. "Critics will say you acted too harshly, too publicly." Selena closed her eyes briefly. Emily Jensen's trembling lips returned to her mind, her voice breaking, "Please give me another chance." Selena's heart tightened. She had not forgotten. She would never forget. "Harsh," she murmured. "What is harsh is prejudice wielded as authority. What is harsh is a captain turning justice into an ultimatum. What is harsh is silence in the face of wrong." She opened her eyes, her gaze steady on Jonathan. Accountability may feel harsh, but without it, there is no change. Jonathan nodded slowly. The car pulled into the headquarters tower, its steel and glass facade gleaming under the night sky. Inside, the boardroom was alive with anxious energy. Men and women in tailored suits sat stiffly, tablets glowing in front of them, stock charts flashing red. Selena entered without hesitation. Conversations died instantly. All eyes turned to her. Some faces were pale with fear, others hardened with skepticism. The chairman rose halfway, then sat again under the weight of her gaze. "Dr. Carter," he began, his voice uneven, "you've caused an incident. Shareholders are demanding answers. Regulators are already calling." This level of disruption, Selena raised her hand, and the words died in his throat. She stepped to the head of the table, her posture tall, her presence unshaken. "Disruption," she said softly, yet the word cut through the air like steel. "That is the disease you mistake for stability. What you call disruption, I call truth revealed, and truth will not wait for shareholders' comfort." The board shifted uneasily, eyes darting to one another. Selena pressed forward, her voice firm. "From this moment, Aerolux will operate under 3 non-negotiable principles. 1, a full cultural audit of the past 24 months of complaints with public disclosure. 2, mandatory training across all levels of staff equity, respect, accountability. 3, executive accountability tied to dignity. If bias or prejudice is proven under your watch, you forfeit your seat at this table." Gasps rippled around the boardroom. One director stammered, "You can't." Selena's eyes narrowed, her tone sharp. "I can. I am CEO. And more than that, I am the authority entrusted with saving this company not from scandal, but from itself. If you cannot stomach that, resign tonight. Others will take your place." Silence followed, heavy as stone. No one resigned. Jonathan stepped forward with a folder, distributing documents. Each contained the immediate action plan Selena had drafted long before the incident. She had anticipated this moment. The directors scanned the pages, their faces paling further as they realized this was not improvisation. It was strategy. Selena let the silence settle, then spoke once more, her voice softer now, but weighted with finality. "This airline will not be remembered for how high it flew, but for how it treated those who trusted it. We will not fail them again." The meeting ended in stunned quiet. Some directors avoided her eyes, others stared at her with reluctant respect. Selena turned and left without waiting for approval. Change had already begun. Hours later, in her private office overlooking the city, Selena finally allowed herself stillness. The skyline glittered, but her mind was far from the lights. She thought of Emily Jensen again, the youngest, trembling, silent. Was there a future for her? Perhaps, but not here. Not under a uniform she had betrayed. Selena's chest ached faintly with the weight of mercy denied. Yet she knew her duty was larger than one young woman. It was to all who would board a flight tomorrow and the day after, trusting that dignity would meet them at the cabin door. Her phone buzzed. Messages poured in, praise from activists, criticism from commentators, pleas from politicians to appear on morning shows. Selena ignored them all. She reached instead for the tablet that contained the audit order, signing her name at the bottom with a firm stroke. She whispered to herself, her voice soft but resolute. Respect first, always. Outside her window, dawn crept across the horizon. The first flight of the morning lifted silently into the air, its lights glimmering against the fading night. Selena watched it climb higher and higher, her heart steady. She had not sought this battle, but it had found her. And in answering it, she had reshaped not only an airline but a standard for an entire industry. Justice had been loud that night, because it had to be. Tomorrow, she would ensure it became quiet, ordinary, expected the invisible foundation beneath every journey. For now, she allowed herself one long breath, closing her eyes as the words echoed within her like a vow. Respect first, dignity always, and with that, Selena Carter began the long work of turning one night's reckoning into a legacy that would endure. What began as a single seat on a crowded aircraft became a mirror held up to the world. In Dr. Selena Carter's calm defiance, we witnessed the strength to confront prejudice without shouting, the courage to demand respect without violence, and the vision to turn humiliation into a catalyst for transformation. This story reminds us that dignity is not negotiable, and silence in the face of injustice is its own betrayal. The flight crew who chose prejudice lost more than their jobs. They revealed the sickness of a culture that values convenience over fairness. But the passengers, the witnesses, and Selena herself showed us something greater, that when truth is exposed, change is possible. May this story leave you not only outraged at injustice, but also inspired to carry respect first in every journey of your own life. If this story moved you, if you believe in dignity, fairness, and justice help us keep telling these stories. Like, share, and subscribe, and join us again for the next chapter. Because the fight for respect is never over, and together we can make sure no one is ever told again that they don't belong.